All right. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
So what you guys got going on this weekend? Anything fun?
I mean, basketball. A lot of basketball.
Yeah, I'm gonna be sports balling too.
Is there sports ball going on this weekend, boys?
A whole bunch of it.
Yeah. Full transparency, I got a game on while we're doing this today.
I actually turned mine off so I could focus because I knew I'd just be sitting here looking up at TV the whole time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not doing anything this weekend. So wife's going out of town tonight. I'll be just kind of hanging out, probably doing too many video games or something like that. I don't know. Something pointless and a waste of time. That's what I'll be doing this weekend. Next weekend I'm going to
flip side, man.
Las Vegas though, next weekend. So.
Nice. Heck yeah. Yeah, and it's all in how you look at it, man. Not pointless and a waste of time. It's relaxing and filling and makes you feel good and smile, man. That's never a waste of time. Anything that makes you happy to me is never a waste of time.
I'm gonna meditate. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah.
There you go. I like that. Cool. Yeah. For me, watching the SEC tourney, pumped for the brackets to come out on Sunday, and hopefully smoking some meats this weekend too. Actually, today I'm gonna grill some ribeyes when we get done working. So excited about that. Be my first steak actually, Eric, on the Blackstone. So hopefully that turns out good. Yeah.
Are you just searing it on the Blackstone? Or are you cooking the whole thing that way?
I think I'm just gonna do the whole thing. Like I used to do a steak like in a cast iron. That was like, I put butter in it and garlic and rosemary and just cook the steak in that cast iron, and those are delicious. So I'm gonna try to do something similar to that. Just cook it all right on the Blackstone and put some garlic butter, rosemary down, and hopefully it's delicious.
Awesome.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, now I'm hungry. I'm gonna go ahead and go buy Hackle Box. Go find a steak.
All right, cool. You guys ready to get started? We'll roll.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for another session of the Hackle Box here on a beautiful Friday in Kentucky. Hopefully it's beautiful wherever you are. We got a few things to talk about, so let's go ahead and dig in. The first one was a vulnerability. Actually, the report was publicly disclosed this week, but it was a vulnerability. I think that was originally identified and disclosed back in December, known as AutoWarp. This was a vulnerability that affected the Microsoft Azure automation service. Did you guys get a chance to look into that one any?
Yeah, a bit. It was interesting, right? I mean, it was, and I think Eric can probably shed some more light on how these actually work, but it was kind of a wild one to me, just that they were exposing that kind of stuff and, and how those auth tokens are used there. But I don't know. I kind of took it as we've been seeing more and more of these sort of cloud service type things lately, being exploited and whatnot. Not that it's, I mean, obviously, right, they're just computers on the other end. So just as more people roll to it, I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
Yeah, I do want to unpack that a little bit more too. I think I'd like to start too talking like maybe a little bit about what the vulnerability is. Maybe let some folks know like who was affected, and then maybe I want to kind of dig into like what questions does this raise for all of us?
Yeah, it's an interesting vulnerability, I'd say too, because it's like, I mean, I don't know how much we want to dive in on it and stuff like that, but there's a vulnerability where essentially people were able to get tokens for other accounts, right? It's essentially what it comes down to. Get OAuth tokens for different accounts other than their own. And I guess the way it works is that there's you have automation scripts running in a sandbox, and it's sandboxed from other users' data, and that's good. That's how you want it to be. You want to be sandboxed out. But apparently part of the process is to stand up a local endpoint, local host endpoint to kind of serve for some metadata and some tokens type stuff. And those get stood up for that actual script that gets executed, or that automation task that gets executed. And then they die when it closes, apparently, as well. And so the issue is that while you can segment and sandbox a execution environment and file environment and all that stuff, they were not segmented to connect to those ports locally. And so you could connect to any of those open ports. And if you found other ones and enumerated them and connected to that range and just tried to connect to all of them and pull data, you could pull tokens from anybody else who was running tasks on that same host. So
yeah, to me, when I seen this and understood that attack path, it was pretty trivial. And I was a little surprised at this point that we hadn't discovered this before. I will say the positive is that I believe the vulnerability was disclosed to Microsoft and the researcher on like December 6th. They had it fixed December 10th. So that's really good. But what scares me when I really think about this is like, so this is the first person to actually disclose this vulnerability. This is kind of thing that scares me whenever we think about any of these, like, was it known by other entities before? Was it abused by other entities before? Because the implications are pretty high. I mean, you know, in that environment, if you get those auth tokens to essentially retrieve data from other entities on that same sandbox, that's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, I'd say, I mean, I don't know how much, I haven't gone in and done the research on this to that level, but I know that in the write-up that the researcher had done on it, when they first found it and were able to pull their own token and they wanted to test the use of their token, they were not able to use it to do much because it didn't have permissions, right? The tokens they were pulling were for managed identities, and unless those managed identities were assigned permissions that would allow you to do something with them, then necessarily grabbing them doesn't, I mean, it's still going to get you access to something, but it might be limited, right?
Yeah.
But that's who's to say that other people out there and tokens that could have been gathered and stuff like that didn't have permissions assigned to them. Just in this particular researcher's case, when he had set up this managed identity for this task, right, or for this service, hadn't assigned permissions to it. But once he did, then obviously the tokens that were gained had those permissions. So it's hard to know the full impact of what someone could have gained off of this, but potentially it's a lot depending on permission sets and stuff like that.
I agree.
I did see that they said that, at least in their limited look at it, they did see some pretty big name companies roll through there and were able to grab their tokens. And sounds like Microsoft did, at least, after they fixed it, let everybody know who may have been impacted by it. So hopefully everybody got that taken care of. But yeah, it's kind of like you had to have two things there to make it work, which I think we see a lot. But it was interesting.
Because you had to capture it during a task actually running, because the ports would shut down when they were not. I mean, the way they kind of did this, the researcher did this, was to set up a task to check constantly over and over again to just keep capturing them, which anyone could have done potentially too. So, but it's not like they're just there constantly. It's only when tasks were running. So.
Right. Yep. Just for our listeners too, I mean, so if you're curious if you may have been impacted by this, the only prerequisites is if you're using automation, Azure automation service, and you have what was the account name? Let me see here. I think I have
the managed identity feature.
Yeah, managed identity feature is enabled, which is enabled by default. Then yes, you would have been vulnerable to this. But I think now, like, this really begs the question for me, like back to what you hit early on, Pink, is like, put all our trust in these cloud services. And I think a lot of people assume that, okay, it's the cloud service, I'm paying them for security, so I don't have to worry about these things, right? But I think this is just one example of really many that we've seen where we can prove that's not necessarily the case. To me, the difference is like, who is really responsible for fixing those issues as they're observed? It's you, or is it the cloud provider? And then we look at this instance particularly and understand too, like, the difference if you're hosting this internally, right, obviously, versus those services are in the cloud, is internally you aren't on devices shared with other entities. So essentially, right, if you look at these pivoting type of exploits where maybe you can reach other customers' data, that's a huge issue in the cloud landscape as we move forward. We put a lot of trust in that. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I do think, kind of even to take that a little further, what you're saying there, I think a lot of these we see are, I mean, so I know I've been digging here for AWS and Azure, right? So it's just part of our process, something we're digging into. And for me, a lot of what I see is just the complication of how to set those up is always a struggle for people. And so that's one side of issues you can have on these cloud services, is you don't always understand the infrastructure and how they have it set up and how you need to configure your stuff. But then you have these where it is more provider side, right? It's something that they did wrong on that end. And yeah, you're absolutely right. When you're on shared hardware, shared equipment, if you can kind of escape that sandbox somehow, that's a big problem.
Yep. Yeah, and I see a comment here. I just want to respond to, a note from Eric. Not Eric, but a different Eric. Are you paying them for security? And what I mean by that is, yeah, you are paying them to securely manage that application. The implementation of that application, no, you don't pay them for that. But if I'm paying Microsoft for Azure AD and Azure services, I fully expect that they will handle, and they do handle, all the patching, the upgrades, and the remediations as a result of vulnerabilities in that software. Whereas if I host that software internally, that responsibility is on me, right? And so that's the difference there. I think a lot of people go that cloud route because they are alleviated of that responsibility. But on the flip side, we're not always thinking about how that if you're on that cloud environment, you're sharing that physical hardware with 25 other entities. Well, one bug could affect all of you guys, all of those entities, right? And theoretically, it could provide access to the pivot from one of those other entities into the other 25 or 24 and have access to your data, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important what Eric is saying here, which is, I mean, like you just said, in this particular case, we're talking about a service that is managed by them. You don't have control over that service. I mean, you can use the service and you can have control of some of the data that's executing that service, but you don't have control of the way things are sandboxed and the way things are handled as far as authentication tokens and things like that, right? So we do rely on them to securely implement this. But it's a good point to anybody out there who's listening, and anyone else for that matter who you talk to about these things, is that, when you put your own code or your own virtual machines or your own services into the cloud, it's not someone else's job to secure those services, that code, that whatever. I mean, if you implement a security issue, that is on you. You're not paying that. Just because it's in their environment doesn't mean they're going to make sure that the security of what you're putting in there is up to snuff, So
yeah,
so it's an important point too, because we see a lot of things like that too, where maybe some things go hand in hand, right? Like I know, however long ago now, right, when the people were taking advantage of the Amazon metadata services and stuff like that, in breaches, there had to be another flaw that was introduced by the actual organization as well, right? There'd have to be some kind of thing that allowed a server-side request forgery, and then that server-side request forgery could be used to access that metadata and gain more information, and obviously Amazon put in some things to help out with that just in case, but that still required a flaw on your side. But in this case, that did not, right? So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I do agree, Eric, with what you're saying, and both Erics here, Eric in the chat and Eric here, that a core fault is too many people do assume that just by the act of migrating into that cloud service, for some reason, it provides a false sense of security for your security. And we've seen that too. Like I know with testing, you've observed it, Eric. I know with cases, Pinky, you've observed that too. We see a lot of folks sometimes who, have an incident as a result of improper configuration on those cloud services. And a lot of time we see it because maybe leadership saying, hey, we got to go with that cloud route because that's what everybody's talking about and it's hot. And then they have their resources go and migrate their systems into that cloud environment without really, knowing how to manage and implement there, and inadvertently exposing themselves to even more risk than they would have if they had kept it on-prem. And I think probably, Pink, that's what you were alluding to a minute ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why we're looking into it here, right? We're building processes here on the blue team side, trying to help some folks out with that kind of thing. But it's very common. I mean, and with good reason, right? Even as folks who have done things like this for years, I pop into those panels and I'm like, holy crap, why is this so confusing? Why do I have to create this security group and this rule and make sure it matches up here? In old school firewall days, right? Just pick your IP, your port, and deny, and call it good, right? It's just very different. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that.
Another comment from another Eric in chat saying Eric's rule. I just want to go ahead and say that that's objectively true. We all know that.
Nice.
And I'll just say in this particular instance too, this was fixed up by, I mean, they did put a fix in place or a mitigation in place that now it requires a header to those calls that has like a secret token key, whatever, I forget exactly what they call it, but some kind of value that's required. And that value is housed within that sandboxed environment in an environment variable. So essentially to be able to, actually request that token now, you should have to pass along a token that's inside of your environment variables. And so as long as you can't somehow escape out of your sandbox, get into someone else's sandbox, see their environment variables, you can't request their tokens anymore. So, that's how they kind of went about fixing this one.
So I got totally sidetracked here, guys. I'm just looking at our participants list. And I see that it looks like someone raised their hand. You guys see that?
I do see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh-oh.
We have
Now we
two
got
people.
more coming.
Now, yeah.
You had to call it out, didn't you?
Yeah, I had to. You guys raise your hand if
You think Eric's rule?
yeah, if you think Eric's rule.
Is there like a
All right, we
hand
got 6,
down?
9,
Looking
10,
for
Look at that.
11.
Look at that.
Nice. That's pretty
Nearly
good,
enough
Eric.
of you. Not nearly
Yeah.
enough of you, but it's fine.
Yeah.
I see
Again,
some
this is
people
an
on my
objective
team.
fact.
I see some people on my team raising their hands saying Eric's rule. I don't know. We're gonna have to talk about that afterwards.
All right, cool. If you did raise your hand for something that you, I don't know, wanted to tell us, I don't know what that is.
There's a
just throw it in
question and
chat.
answers area as well. There's chat and questions
Yeah.
and answers. Use one of the two. Feel free to. We did have another comment in here about from John saying, as far as the feds are concerned, we're responsible for the security of our data, whether it's hosted in house or in the cloud. Kind of final responsibility and due diligence on their side. I mean, I think that's the case kind of regardless. You have vendor risk management for a reason, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to have to work with vendors and you have to have them prove out their securities and you need to vet them out and stuff like that too, and hope. But I mean, obviously things happen, but at the end of the day, I think it does come down to you regardless. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you guys have some comments on that. Maybe not.
Ditto. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, we are at the will of our vendors, but like you said, it all comes down to managing that, understanding the risk associated with those vendors and doing our own due diligence, just like John said there. It's ultimately always our responsibility.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's boogie on then. Anything else you guys want to say about the cloud stuff? Words of wisdom.
Every time I hear the word cloud, it just makes me giggle a little bit still.
Me too.
Still to this day, I think it always
computer.
will.
Yeah.
Someone else's computer.
Yeah. And I think maybe my primary message is like exactly I think what a lot of our commenters are saying, what we've been talking about is like, don't have a false sense of security in those cloud services just because you're implementing in the cloud. You're still responsible for securing it always. And then also, you think about that impact we talk about where there is an application flaw, right? The effect of that being could be greater than if you were hosting that internally, right? So just thinking about you're going to be on shared systems, you're on someone else's computer with 25 other people on that same computer, so that one vulnerability can affect all 25 of those entities. I think that's something we should all be just thinking about when we posture our services and where those services live.
Yeah, I guess one last thing I'll say about it too is, as I already hit on, with this is those managed identities and having certain permissions and things like that kind of required to, you could get the token, but it only has the permissions it has assigned to it. Just reminds me of like in every situation, whether it be cloud or whether it be your internal environment or whatever, always limit the permissions to something has to what exactly it needs and nothing more. Especially in cloud, when we start talking about cloud, we start talking about like Amazon and Azure and stuff like that. We start getting into some things that can get real muddy real fast. I mean, there's entire positions dedicated to just AWS, user management and permission management, because there's so much that can be done with it. So make sure you're doing that right. Make sure you're always using the least privilege possible, just in case something like this springs up. You have no control over it and it comes about. Hopefully, at least the account that gets compromised, if one does get compromised, has very limited access and only access to what it needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Pink, anything to add?
No, I mean, just really just that, right? I mean, it's that least access and sort of default deny, we always talk about, right? Just as little as you can possibly implement to make sure things work, right? I mean, whether that's on the account side or on the, network side of it.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna switch things up here on the fly with you guys. Let's talk the APCs. Who wants to kick that off? Pink, Eric, you guys take it first.
I feel like I did a lot of talking. I'm gonna go ahead and look at Pink right now.
Yeah, I thought that might happen.
Pink.
Yeah, so there was one that came out very recently here in the last few days. We were doing a little digging into it. Realistically, there's not a ton of information out there about it yet. Just essentially, so APC UPS is right. So battery backup systems made by APC. They're apparently, I actually didn't know this, but they're apparently a subsidiary of Schneider now. I may have always been the case. I just thought they were competitors. So APC, those are in every environment. I would bet that almost everyone on the call, if you're in some sort of corporate environment, there are APC devices in your environment. And so in particular, these are with the smart UPS system. And as I was making notes, I'd put a thing in here that I never trusted these. I always hated those smart UPSs because it was just like, why? Why does it need to be there? But so essentially the way, and we can dig into more of like how these work, right? But there are 3 CVEs that came about with this: CVE 2022-22805, 2022-22806, and then 2022-0175. And so the 3 of these have some different implications and that kind of thing, but it all revolves around essentially getting an RCE, or remote code execution, on the APS units, that are connected to the internet. And so I'll let you guys jump in here too, but sort of, I think we all had this reaction as, why do you need these connected to the internet? I think there are some reasons that can go there, but whether or not those are valid or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, a little bit scary, right? One last thing I did note in here. So we always like to joke around and say that these attacks aren't like the TV show Mr. Robot, but in particular, this was one that they did cover on Mr. Robot, was attacking those battery backup units. So I thought that was kind of neat. But what'd you guys think about this one?
Oh, I put the wrong thing. I was just going to make a quick correction too, that you said 0175, but it's 0715.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Thanks.
And I was going to put it in chat to everyone, but I accidentally just sent it to us. So I'm sending it again.
Yeah, same. Like my initial thoughts here were just, why in the hell do we need to have our UPSs either ingress accepting traffic from the internet, or even egress to the internet? You shouldn't do that. To me, that seems silly to begin with. Like we always talk about the default deny, and I can understand people saying, well, what if I need to, patch my firmware and update that? Like, you can still stage those updates. You don't have to have your device that needs the firmware update directly communicating with the public repository to pull those updates down. You should have a process for staging those and then be able to deploy securely. Always when, and I've stood up some of these in my past, I'm sure we all have. And, like we just put them on an isolated network dedicated to the management of that UPS, because a lot of these smart UPSs are really cool now, and they have all kinds of sweet stuff like humidity and smoke and, water monitoring and heat and all this cool stuff. And you do want those alerts. You're paying a lot of money for these smart UPSs, and there's a lot of features in there on top of the battery and runtime that you want to be in tune to. But there's a way to do that without exposing it, even internally. Just creating that network for this device to live, allowing that device to communicate with, the SNMP trap, so the SNMP servers, your SMTP server, and then having a secure way to access the management port. Otherwise, there should be no other access to or from these. So to me, this is really kind of, if you just follow our best practices, you're probably not going to be affected by this, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I do understand too that, like, it was funny. I was looking at their remediation recommendations, right? Number one's patch. Yeah, you should do that. Make sure you patch, because the firmware thing, you really want to get that fixed. And then the other is like their second recommendation. If you've seen this, if you're using NMC, so there are a few different modules, and I think Eric, you have more information. You can probably explain this better than me, but the NMC is like the internally connected one. The recommendation was change your default password. The default password was APC. And I looked at that, and my notes here say, why in the hell are you using this to begin with? Because who is still, hopefully nobody's listening to us today, is still deploying devices in their environment and using the default password? I just shook my head. And then the next one, I shook my head even more, because it said deploy ACLs in which the UPS can only communicate with approved Schneider cloud IPs. Again, like we talk about, if you have to talk to someone on the internet, if this system has to go to the internet, doesn't mean it needs untethered access to the internet. It can just have access to those required IPs for those business operations. I go back to Larrygate and the SolarWinds stuff. That is why that was a problem. Back to the Kaseya stuff. That's why that's a problem, because you're allowing your infrastructure untethered access to the internet. Just stop it. Stop it. And then you don't have to worry about any of this. Sorry, I'm
no, I just saw the
dropping. I'm sorry.
I just saw I think it's the Michael Jordan meme with the stop it, get help, right when he was doing all the gambling commercials. But that's all I could see when you're doing that.
Mm-hmm. All right, sorry.
And then their next recommendation too was deploy ACLs, right? Which is what you were already kind of talking about too, as far as what can only allow them to or limit access to communicate to only specific communicate IPs or whatever devices. Yeah, we can jump in a little bit on kind of what these flaws were. I mean, I don't want to dive too deep. They can get pretty complicated pretty fast, but I mean, 0715 was a firmware related one. What it comes down to is that the firmware wasn't cryptographically signed, didn't have any way of validating that it was a proper firmware, that had been released by APC or Schneider Electric. And so anyone could potentially create a firmware that could do something malicious, essentially, right? And then if they had some method of getting that firmware uploaded to that device or flashed onto that device, then you had an issue. I don't think that one really requires too much diving into. I think that makes sense to most people in this industry. So yeah. The other two are related to the TLS protocol, specifically like error handling of TLS packets and things like that. One of them basically allowed a heap overflow by being able to say that the TLS packet size was larger than the actual data allocation for it, and then cause a heap overflow and be able to get malicious code potentially, or malicious data executed. And then the other one is has to do with an ability to do some state confusion in the actual handshake of the TLS, and then cause a authentication bypass and allow you to allow an attacker to mimic the cloud services, right? So should an attacker be able to get in a man-in-the-middle position, which is generally going to be more on the local network, but maybe in some certain situations could be from the external internet too, if there was other things involved. They could pose like they were the cloud environment and potentially have the APC unit connect to them, and then they'd be able to control it, give it whatever instructions they wanted, flash it with a new firmware that was malicious, etc. So
Yeah, and we talk a lot about how these things do affect real people, right? But oftentimes we're not looking at an actual physical issue here. And I know part of the scary thing with this one is they're kind of like, oh, they can set your UPS on fire, and I don't know how true that is, right? I don't want to test that. I don't really want to know necessarily, but I mean, realistically, if you're flashing new firmware, you could probably disable some of the controls for overheating and that kind of thing. And there may be some really big impacts here. Those you're talking like those data center units that are 2 racks wide full of batteries. That's a lot of power there. So
yeah, and also you can just kill power to the data center. I mean, that to me, that's what I look at and say, like, sure, they could burn it down, but if they have the access to this exploit path, why not just kill the power? All the stuff's down, right? If the goal is to cause interruptions, which could be, right? We've talked about that with things. Yeah, it could have a significant impact.
Yeah, I will say that the white paper that was released for this research is really informative. If anybody wants a good read, it dives in deep and it's pretty neat. But they actually even go into like how you could adjust voltage and mess with different things and potentially burst capacitors and stuff using firmware updates and things like that. It's a very neat read. It's a long one, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I'll be sure and link that too. I want to say a thanks to Nicole, one of our listeners, who actually dropped this in our inbox and asked that we talk about it today. So thanks for sharing that, Nicole. And anybody else, just want to encourage everyone here, if you have topics or things you'd like us to talk about in the future, make sure you let us know, and we'll do our best to include that in the next show. We can't always accommodate, but we will try our best.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated that link, because I got it right as I was having a customer call and they just asked me about that. I was like, oh yeah, I just got a link. Let me read on this really quick. So super helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, cool. I don't know, words of wisdom before we move on here. To me, follow their recommendations, like we've said. Network isolate here, like we've talked about. Don't allow default egress, like we've talked about. And yeah, patch your stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. You guys want to talk about Dirty Pop? Eric, you want to tell us about Dirty Pop?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's a kernel bug in many versions of Linux. I think it started in 5.8 Linux kernel, and then it was introduced. It actually wasn't introduced there, but it was enabled in a way that it now could be taken advantage of, the bug that already existed. I don't quote me exactly on that version. I hope that's right. I didn't take a note on it, but and it essentially allowed a privilege escalation, or not privilege escalation, but a privilege right to the page. That's okay. I've been getting outside of this. So essentially would allow an unprivileged user to write data over a file in the memory pages, right? And so essentially being able to change a read-only file, or a file they wouldn't normally have access to, or anything like that, without actually the ability to write to it in the first place. And then be able to use that to potentially overwrite things like the SE password, SE shadow files. And to get privilege escalation, overwrite some of the examples that were given as set UID or SUID applications that would run as root when anyone ran them. So overwrite those with something malicious and then have it run as root essentially. And then after a reboot or anything like that, since it actually was never written to the file, just written to the page, that would go away, and it looks pretty clean too. So not only can it give privilege escalation or the ability to make the system do things you shouldn't be able to do from an unprivileged state, but then on top of it, it can be kind of difficult to see that it even happened.
Yeah, for sure. And I looked at this a little bit this week, and the exploit is trivial, right? There's multiple proof of concepts that have been released already. I've looked at one. I didn't look at the others. I'm sure you've looked at a few, but it's a really trivial exploit as well. The other thing that stuck out to me is like the impact, like it's Linux kernel 5.8 or later, which is a ton, right? I think there's a few kernels maybe they have already fixed. And the other thing was like most Android, from my understanding. So most Android devices were affected by this as well. And so the impact it's big. There's, large volume of devices out there right now that are vulnerable to this. But I guess the saving grace and the good thing on the flip side is to be able to exploit, you have to have access to that system, right? And so, so that's the good thing. It is a scary vulnerability, but if the attacker has access to the system at that point, like we already say, like, you're probably screwed anyway. I don't mean to put it like that, but to me, that's the reality in most cases.
Yeah, in a lot of situations, you obviously want to secure your data and secure your things in a Linux environment, et cetera. But I mean, a lot of cases, once someone gets on, they're logged into your system, they get access to a lot of things anyway. But yeah, having a privilege escalation is not going to be good. We're going to say Pink?
Yeah. No, I was just going to agree. I was just saying, as I was looking through this one, like, it looks really bad, but it does at least require some local, so hopefully you don't have an SSH session or something that's out there with a bad password or no MFA or something like that, some way to remotely become local, but otherwise you have to be there to exploit it.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting how this one kind of got discovered. This kind of got discovered because there were some, log files that were getting corrupted, and they were trying to figure out why and how this was happening, and then couldn't figure out what was going on. And then, by rooting through it and realizing, like trying to figure out what's going on with this application, what's going on with this part and this part and this part, not being able to kind of figure it out, finally narrowed it down to a kernel bug, and then investigated that and actually was able to start recreating it, and then found this. Like, they weren't necessarily researching this to find the vulnerability in the first place. They were trying to figure out what was going on with their files, because they were having log corruption and stuff like that. And it was like kind of sporadic, and certain files were getting overwritten and they couldn't figure out why, and yada, yada, yada. And then, that's what ended up happening. So pretty neat when stuff like this comes out of that, because this is something that's been around for a while now, and affects a lot of versions. And it was found because of some bugs happening and causing issues in log files. So
the application that we're investigating with those log files? Just curious.
Sorry, what was that? I was reading the chat that just came through from an Eric. Eric's important.
Eric's more important to me. I get it. You had mentioned, I think they were investigating some problems with the application writing to log files specifically. Do you know what that application was they were investigating? And for no real reason, just curious.
I don't remember. I think it was web log files that were getting, I don't remember exactly, but I know that what was happening is that they were being overwritten with like 8 bytes or something like that. And they were kind of trying to figure out what's going on, but it was always the same. And it turned out to be like a PK header for like PK zip. And they were trying to figure out what could have been doing that. And then they found a source that would be doing that, but there's no reason it should have write access to those. And it wasn't writing to those files. And so found it was writing to pipes, and the pipes were dirty and then getting merged down into it. And it's a whole thing, but it was unrelated entirely to the software at hand. And it was a kernel bug at the end of the day that was causing it to happen. But
sorry, I totally got distracted by the Eric's chat now as well.
Yeah,
I think
see?
I should read that.
So I caught it. And it is just water. This one's not moonshine. So, but I will say, and this is not advice for anybody, but if it was moonshine, it would be more homemade stuff as opposed to the off the shelf. Not a huge fan of the off the shelf. It's generally watered down. But definitely not advice, because you can get in some real trouble buying homemade moonshine. So know your source, and not that I've ever done it either. I'm not saying I've done that.
Never.
So, but
He
be
doesn't have
careful
a
what you
setup
drink.
right next to him in that little wood shack he's sitting in. Definitely doesn't.
No, no, it's for making gas, man. These gas prices are out of control.
Engine cleaner.
That's right.
Yeah, octane booster. That's
That's
actually
right.
what it is. Yeah, moonshine. That's fun stuff, man. I've got a friend unnamed from Eastern Kentucky who it's been a long family business. I mean, they're old school moonshiners, and every time I see this guy, he'll bring me a quart of something, and it's always good. It's real smooth, and I'll take a sip on this. He's like, just a sip now, just a sip now. And like, what's the proof on this? He's like, yeah, that one came in about 140, 145. And I always have a great time with this friend, but the strangest thing is I usually don't remember the entire night. I don't know how.
Sure, it's weird. It's a time warp,
weird.
right? It's got kind of
Yeah, it's a time
strange
warp.
energy around it. Yeah.
All right, I agree. No store-bought moonshine, but I can't tell you how to get the other moonshine. I can't condone it either, but yeah. All right, anything else on the dirty pop?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on. We want to take a few minutes today too. I've been getting a lot of questions. I don't know if a lot of you guys have been getting the same questions too from folks. Just, how is the Russian-Ukraine conflict impacting us? Have we seen, an increase in frequency of incidents? Are we seeing increase in frequency of attacks within our sectors and things like that? And so since it is on everybody's mind, we thought we would just take a few minutes today and chat amongst ourselves about that, and hopefully give you guys the information from our perspective. And if you guys have other questions too, I'd encourage you to throw those into the chat so we can try our best to answer those. I'll start with this. The biggest question I'm getting right now is, have we seen an increase of attacks? And pretty general, but I've heard that one a lot. Have we seen an increase of attacks sourcing from Russia? Right. And I'll answer, and I'd like you guys to chime in too on your thoughts, but my question has been no. I mean, realistically, we have seen an uptick in attacks in specific sectors, but it started way before this, right? We can go back to probably the middle of summer last year, or maybe even into fall last year. That we really started seeing an uptick. And a lot of those do seem to be from Russian actors, but not all of those are from Russian actors. I can say it seems like we've increased a lot in the manufacturing sector. We've seen more incidents there, just on average than we typically have. All sectors are still being affected. But I will also say that I can't say that uptick is in any relation to the current conflict that's going on today. What I can tell you that current uptick is 100% related to is proxy logon and proxy shell, which we talk about a lot. And I know Pinky put out a blog on our threat posts last week about this, and we've talked about it on here a few times. But we've seen that a year ago when proxy logon hit, the Hafnium attacks happened, and all that. We looked at a lot of Exchange servers, and I can't remember one that wasn't already compromised when we looked at it. And this is in a short period of time. But I think every single one of those we looked at least had a shell dropped on it. And so we were able to work with our clients and get those servers cleaned up and patched and secured. But what we're realizing now is there were more entities who patched and didn't threat hunt. And so they had those web shells living on those servers still. So even after they patched, those servers were alive, or those shells were alive. And then fast forward 6 months later, the attackers started working their rounds, and they went back and started hitting all those boxes for more severe incidents, ultimately in most cases leading to ransom. And so that's a really long answer, but yeah, we've seen an uptick well before the conflict started. We have seen an uptick specifically in manufacturing space. But beyond that, have we seen anything change since the actual physical conflict started? No, we haven't. And that doesn't mean that's going to be the same in 2 weeks or 4 weeks from now. But today, the answer is no. So yeah, I think I talked a lot about that. I don't know. I'd like Pinky, Eric, you guys to give your thoughts too.
Yeah, and I'll jump into. I actually, I disagree a little bit, just in that I think we have seen something change really over the last 3 weeks, and it's not what you would think. Is I actually think we've seen fewer attacks originating from those Russian-based groups that we've seen. We've just kind of had almost a little bit of a downturn in those over the last 3 weeks. We're seeing a lot of business email compromise and that kind of thing, and we're still seeing plenty of cases come in, right? But the Monday after sort of all that broke, I kind of came in ready for battle, right? Because we had that in our heads of, okay, this stuff's kicking off. This is probably going to be a pretty rough week, and just kind of stayed on alert all week. And maybe it's not me reading the situation correctly or something, but it really seemed like it was kind of slow. We're not seeing a whole lot out of those guys. I don't know if they're busy with other things, right, related to the actual attacks that are going on over there and that kind of thing. But we've seen a little bit of downturn there. I do 100% agree that over the last year and a half, whatever that is, we've seen a ton, right? And a lot of, to be fair, a lot of Russian threat actors involved. That's pretty normal. I don't think it's necessarily any worse or anything even over the last couple of months. It's just been kind of normal. But you're 100% right. It's been really, really heavy on the proxy shell, proxy logon, post exploit situations. People that come to us and say, no, we patched, we're good. And then, we dig in there and it's like, no, either you patched the earlier one, but you didn't patch the later one, or you patched and didn't threat hunt, like you said, things like that. And the other thing I will say is you're right on the manufacturing over the last, 6 months, a year, whatever. I have seen more. I have to choose my words carefully here, because we don't want to give away anything that we don't need to, but more manufacturing and entities that you might expect to be somewhat involved in these types of things. But I don't necessarily know that it's anything abnormal. I mean, these people are always targeted, manufacturing and folks that have things that foreign entities want. I mean, they're always targeted. It's not a whole lot new, but it's been relatively quiet. I mean, from what I would expect to happen right now anyway.
Yeah, obviously, you guys are on that incident response side. You're going to see those cases a lot more than, I mean, me as a penetration tester, as an attacker, is not necessarily focused on what's coming in. I'm just focused on what I can simulate, what we can do. But one thing I think it's good about it, I got family members. My dad calls me a decent amount about whenever he hears about this stuff, and it's like, I bet you guys are slammed. I bet you guys are slammed with all this stuff, and because of that, I think one good thing that's come out of at least the questions that people are asking around the conflict and on that stuff is that people are worried about it. People are thinking about it more. They're focused on it. I'm hoping that that's a good trend, that people are, actually spending a decent amount of energy and thought on going, hey, how is this going to affect things? As far as, bringing it to light for a lot of people, security, because security is a big deal. And I think we all in this industry and on the security side of things realize that, but then sometimes it's like how few people will take it seriously outside of that, and how few people will be concerned about certain things. So I'm glad to see that people are interested in it and they're concerned about it. But the reality is, like you said, I don't think attacks are necessarily increasing at this point. Yeah. And then as far as the talking to the proxy log and proxy shell stuff, I got to imagine, this isn't based off of my research, but I just have to imagine whenever you have something large like that, which there's so many endpoints out there, so many hosts out there that are affected by a flaw, and you can kind of dump and shotgun the internet with these types of things, that the dwell time potentially increases quite a large time on some of these things, right? So like you said, people who did this patch and without a threat hunt, they just have these large dwell times that don't even realize are happening right now. So I guess that really just drives home the whole, like, hey, someone could be in your environment. Just because you patch something when you heard about it doesn't mean it didn't already get exploited. And make sure you're still doing a threat hunt internally, taking a look for these types of things. I mean, as an attacker, as someone who does stuff like that, especially if we have long engagements and stuff, that's definitely one of the ways you might go about it, is try to get your stuff in first and then continue doing something else and then come back to it later, so.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I know, we talked about it a little bit, where kind of that land grab mentality, right? It happened a lot with the Citrix NetScaler, the ADC vulnerability. You had the one group that was going around and they were actually compromising the devices and then patching them, leaving their shell to get back in later, but they were patched so that nobody else could compromise it. I think we see things like that. Probably not so much with proxy logon or proxy shell, because it's a little harder to do that. But But yeah, I mean, I think I sent Oscar a message that Monday and said, I think we're about to find out how deep the Exchange and Log4j rabbit hole goes, because it serves a reason that these would be targeted now if those attackers, those threat actors have left behind persistence from those other attacks. But yeah, so far haven't seen it.
Yeah. I completely agree with all that. Like, so one funny thing, we always see that average 12 time statistic, right? And, incident reports that come out every year. I bet those dwell times are really going to change. When we look at the, stats that come out as a result of Hafnium, proxy logon, proxy shell, I should say. And another factors like what you said, Eric. So a lot of the times the first stage actor is not the same as the second stage actor. And there were a lot of cases in proxy logon where people just established that foothold, established those shells, and they sold that access. They would do a little recon, identify who that business is. Then depending upon who their target is, you got a really juicy target, depending on what you're doing and what space you're in. That access and that backdoor is worth a lot of money. And so that increases the dwell time on top of just the fact that, if we had 100,000 servers that suddenly are backdoored, you don't have time to hit all 100,000 of those entities in 2 weeks time, 2 months time, even we're seeing 12 months time. I know we've worked cases recently, right, Pink, where the dwell time, we saw the first point of ingress were probably still from April of last year, and they weren't impacted until February of this year, February of this year. So yeah, I got some really crazy dwell times there. And really what scares me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean I was just gonna say, at least not a noticeable impact, right? I mean, there is always the chance there's exfiltration and things like that happen in those long dwell times. So that is something to be aware of.
Yeah, and I guess that's my point. Like the final stage, which is the ransom, right? That's taking a significant amount of time. What happens in between there, though? Yeah, it could still be active, and I think that's back to Eric's point. That's why you should hunt. Make sure that if you were affected, you're properly hunting those things. And really, what scares me the most about this event is like we look at Log4j, right? And it's the same thing, that you were able to establish persistence through Log4j. You could patch, but it doesn't correct those shells that were dropped. How many people out there didn't properly hunt their Log4j systems that have shells living right now? And we're not gonna know, because they're too busy still finishing up their proxy logon work for another 3 to 6 months. And then guess what? We'll get started on those Log4j shells that we've dropped. I don't know. I mean, but that's what I believe will happen next. Sorry, I think we got a little off topic from the Russia stuff and started getting on our soapbox about threat hunting, which is cool. I like doing that. The other question I get to kind of relating to that is which sectors should be under heightened awareness right now, right? Like which entities should be under heightened awareness. And I don't think this changes for me. I think this is always the case. For me, it's critical infrastructure. Like we think about, our water, our energy, and medical. And mainly for me, I think those sectors should always be under heightened awareness, because you affect human lives on an everyday basis, right? And there are others, yes, but I think those are our big three. If we don't have water, clean water, then we're going to see human life impacted. If we don't have electricity, we're going to see significant human life impacted, and the same through medical. If we don't have our medical facilities, there's a significant human life impact. And so to me, if we looked at how that conflict could evolve, right, those are the sectors for me that I believe could be targets. If we see our cyber war start to evolve into another thing that could be a little nastier than what it really is right now, honestly. Luckily, I don't think that those boundaries have been crossed too much. We saw some incidents, but in this case, the scale isn't as wide, or the net isn't as big as it could be. That scares me. And on the flip side, it scares me because I know how vulnerable a lot of those sectors are today. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, the one thing that jumped out at me, just kind of as we were even talking through this day, because I hadn't given it much thought yet because we hadn't dug in too deep, but on the APC one, right? I mean, if we do end up in those types of situations, if those boundaries do get crossed that you talk about, I don't know how exploitable that one's actually going to be, right? But there's a concern right there, for like the disruption, like you talked about, or even something even more destructive. That one's a little bit concerning, but I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. Like, it's not always best to focus on specifically those types of things, right? Focus on the wider things you can do, as opposed to a single vulnerability. So don't get too hung up on any one thing there. But I do agree. I mean, it is worrisome for those critical infrastructure, those things that impact human life, because historically they've not been all that hardened, right? It's been a little bit of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just agree with what you guys said. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm gonna get on my soapbox for 1 second and share one thing, and then we'll talk about Eric. It's all Eric's today, man. Got another comment from Eric. It's Eric's. So great. But I did see something I wanted to share with you guys. And so it was early this week. There was a news article that broke that was posted announcing that CrowdStrike, Cloudflare, and Ping1 were giving away free services to folks in water, energy, and medical for like a 60-day thing, right? And it's, because you're under heightened awareness due to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, blah, blah, blah. And I read that and I thought about it a whole lot. And I think a lot of people are going to see that and be like, oh, that's great. These companies are trying to help. But I see it as a money grab, and it kind of pisses me off because they're giving you these services for 60 days. And we're talking about implementing a cloud WAF. And if anybody's ever implemented a cloud WAF in a sophisticated or complicated environment, that project's going to be 30 days or more anyway. So you spend half your time just implementing the tool, the other half trialing it. And then guess what? To roll back out, you're going to have downtime. So they got their hooks in you, and you're going to start paying for those services. I see it as, I see the goodwill side, but I also see it as a money grab more than trying to help people, right? And I think that kind of pissed me off a little bit. And so I just want to say, like, I took that back, and I've been working on this all week, and I'm going to be launching a program. We are with FRSecure sometime soon, hopefully in the next 1 to 2 weeks. That is going to be a free service for folks that are in water and energy right now. I hope to be able to expand it to medical soon, but we're starting with water and energy. But essentially, we're going to be building essentially your framework for how you secure your ICS systems, giving you the guides and the assessment tools so you can assess yourself, have all the details that you can follow this framework to be able to successfully implement your ICS controls. But even backing up before that, though, is number one, we're going to do this for you, is help you inventory your external systems and help you understand what you have available right now, and then helping you make the decision, should these things be publicly available or should they not be publicly available? And then if you make the decision they should be, helping you understand you've got to MFA anything that has a logon capability, right? No more single factor logons. We talk about that all the time, but we still find them. And we still find people who have access exposed to the internet, assets exposed to the internet. They have no idea are even there, right? And so let's start there. Let's clean up. Let's get your stuff that's publicly exposed that shouldn't be offline. Let's help you make those decisions. And then let's make sure you have a plan to MFA those. And then we'll give you that framework for how you actually secure your ICS infrastructure internally as well. So I'm pretty excited about that. I will loop in everybody. You'll hear about that when we roll. And if you are on the call and you're in one of those sectors, either energy or water, shoot me an email afterwards, and let's make sure we get you signed up for the pilot group when we start working with this, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
Just wanted to make one quick distinction, right? Just for those who may be on here who listen to us who don't participate in any of our services now, right? So we're not selling you we're not giving you a software product, anything like that to put in your environment. This is not that kind of thing. To your point about those other three getting their hooks in there and then they're kind of there, right? This isn't that type of thing. So I just want to be clear about that. So I think that's pretty awesome. I mean, I think it's great that we're able to do that kind of thing. It's killer. And I'm kind of glad you pointed that out about those three. I saw that we had it as a quick hit on our thing here, and I was wondering if you're going to go that route because I had the same thought, right? Yeah. It's good. I'm glad, but at the same time, yeah, by the time you roll it out, it's probably going to be time to pay for it. That's always a problem.
I think if you want to help people, let's look at the real problems right now, right? And the problems for our water companies aren't they don't have a cloud WAF, right? The problem for our water companies are they're understaffed. They don't properly understand how to implement controls. And so they're failing there. Let's help them with that. And like my goal is, let me give you the knowledge. Let me give you the tools. You can take this and run with it. I'll give you that first step, right? This is your inventory. Let's help you make the decisions on what is available and what isn't. And let's give you guidance how you secure those things that are online. The rest is up to you. We're going to give you that information. If you want us to help you do that, we can get consultants to do that. That will have to cost money, unfortunately, because we are a business. But that first step's free. We're going to give you the framework free. We're going to give you the assessment free, and you can do it all yourself. We're going to do it all yourself and come back to us later and be like, hey, did I do this right? We can do that too. If you want us to help you do it, we can do that too,
All right. So what do you think the chances are that the Russian actors are busy with everybody attacking them, and that's why they're not doing stuff?
I think there's some factors, right? I mean, that is a possibility, right? I mean, I know they mentioned like anonymous there and that kind of thing. I did see that there have been some anonymous attacks that have been a little more impactful, right? They're releasing some documents and things like that. But I think that's possible. I also saw that there were some big providers that were kind of cutting off service there as well. I have some general concerns around all the way that may play out, but that's too big for, I think, for us to dig into here. But that very well may be a possibility, right? They may just be busy. They may also know that there is a heightened state of alert right now as well, and let's back off. Not all of those are true state-sponsored actors in Russia, but they're state look the other way. We know you're doing it kind of actors. So there's some stuff there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been an outpouring of support in a lot of ways that has had some effect, and I think there will be hacktivists and other types of groups and people just wanting to get involved that'll cause issues. Yeah, whether that has a slowdown or causes any kind of decreased amount of attacks coming toward us or other nations from Russian actors or Russian state actors or anything like that, I think it's difficult to even say. I mean, I think we just look at what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is what we're seeing right now. So
realistically, the ones we're dealing with are generally financially motivated anyway. I mean, at least from the attacks that we work, it's, they want those sweet Bitcoins or Monero, as they've been switching to a little more here lately. So it's not as much of the, we're going to hit you because you're a foreign threat to us. It's more of a, hey, can we get paid? So that's something to keep in mind too.
And Eric also put in chat something to back up what you were just saying, Oscar, and talking about the stuff we were just talking about. But the same thing happened at the beginning of the pandemic with schools, right? Giving a bunch of stuff for free for 6 months, and then all of a sudden, getting hammered on it at the end because they couldn't pay for those things. But now they started implementing those things.
Right.
And,
yeah. A lot of those were things like Cisco Umbrella and stuff like that too. Those are not trivial things to roll out or pull back.
Right.
That was, So.
Yeah, I see it all as just a money grab, man. Another money grab. And it's like, I don't know. It's the things that piss me off. And I think it probably pisses all of us off here for sure. And I bet most of our listeners as well. So I don't like it one bit.
Yeah.
I was going to make a joke about you just being cynical, but no, you're right. I mean, you're 100% right.
Try not to get into it too much because there's a lot of room for frustration. But the fact is that there's a lot of room in security for things to get done, maybe for the wrong reasons or the wrong way. We're always, I know the three of us at least are very serious about doing things for the right reasons in the right way. And that's, I think an important thing. So I'm glad that we're going to be starting something up. We can start helping out in certain ways. I would like to also offer out there, I mean, like to people that are out there that are listening right now, if you have other suggestions in this way that you think someone in our position can help in those things, we're open to hearing those types of things too, So.
Yeah. Thanks for putting that out there. I love that, man. And I encourage everybody, and we love hearing from you guys too. I mean, it really is awesome. And like we always say, like, we don't know everything. We know what we know. But together as a community, including all you guys that are listening, like, we're all stronger as a community. We're better as a group. So, share your information with us. Send things that you think we could be doing better. We could be helping more to us. We will listen. And as always, keep sending recommendations and things you want to hear about from us. We like that a lot.
Yeah, I will make one request to people out there that make recommendations or for topics for us to talk about on Hackle Box. Send them more than 1 day in advance. That way we have a chance to include them a little bit better. We've actually received a decent amount of recommendations in the past that we've had to skip over purely because we get them like the morning of Hackle Box or the night before. So like throughout the month, when you're sitting around, if you're someone who regularly comes here, if you see some news that you'd be interested in hearing us talk about the following month of whatever that next Hackle Box is, send it out as soon as you're thinking about it. Don't just think about like, oh yeah, I got that coming up in 2 days. It's on my calendar. Let me send them this thing I just read this morning. And
Yeah. I see John, he's put a note about my contact. I think we do include the email just to the Hackle Box. I think it's Hacklebox at FRSecure. Is that right, guys? Yep. I believe that's what it is. You can send there. I get that. And and then I'll reply to you and we can start a one-on-one conversation as well. All right, cool. I think this was a good show. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I appreciate everybody who took some time out of their Friday to spend some time with us. I hope you got value out of this. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you again in about a month. Also, go Cats. It's March Madness.
I was hoping. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye. See you guys.